Even though we are only a couple of weeks into the 2019-20 season, these first couple of weeks have been very kind to some teams, and then it's been quite the opposite for some other teams, and it's kind of been the same way when it comes to players as well. And I already did a video talking about some surprises to start the season, so in today's video I'm going to talk about 10 players who in my opinion have been a little bit underwhelming, and I guess you can call them disappointing so far. And again, it is still very early, and these guys will most likely turn it around, but I thought it would be something interesting to talk about here early in the season. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video. Starting the video off, and this is in no particular order, we have Jake DeBrusk from the Boston Bruins. Now last year was a very good season for DeBrusk. He would have been a 30 plus goal scorer had he have stayed healthy, but unfortunately only was able to skate in 68 games, but still had 27 goals and 15 assists for 42 points. And coming into this year, I definitely thought he could take that goal scoring up a notch, and if he stays healthy and plays 75 plus games, I thought he could have been like a 35 to 40 goal scorer, and he very well still could. He could definitely get hot as the season rolls on, but so far through the first 8 games of the season, even though Boston has gotten off to a really hot start, Jake DeBrusk has kind of gotten off to a cold start with just 1 goal and 1 assist through the first 8 games of the season, but it hasn't really been affecting this Boston team. That top line of Bergeron, Pastrnak, and Marchand is clicking on all cylinders, so it doesn't really affect the team that DeBrusk has gotten off to a little bit of a slow start, but as the season bleeds on, you're going to have some injuries, and you are really going to need Jake DeBrusk to step up. So hopefully this is just a cold start to the season and something that doesn't last all year long, and I don't really think it will. I definitely think Jake DeBrusk is still more than capable of scoring 30 plus this year. Moving along now to former Boston Bruin Ryan Donato, current member of the Minnesota Wild. Now when he was traded from the Bruins to the Wild at last year's trade deadline, everyone kind of thought it was going to end up being a steal for the Minnesota Wild, especially watching how good he was in his short stint in Minnesota last season. 22 games with the Wild after the trade, 4 goals, 12 assists for 16 points. And after seeing how good Donato was the back end of last season for the Minnesota Wild, a lot of people had some high expectations for him coming into this season, but so far he really hasn't been able to live up to them. 7 games that he's actually played in, 0 goals, 1 assist for 1 point. He's been a healthy scratch a couple of times, which is definitely unfortunate, but you have to get Ryan Donato in the lineup. You have to get him producing because he is most likely going to be a big part of this team's future, and in my opinion this team should already be looking towards the future and really focusing on their young players like Ryan Donato. Moving on now, from the San Jose Sharks, a guy that I had a lot of high expectations for heading into the season, and that is Timo Meier, who is coming off a breakout 2018-19 campaign with 30 goals and 36 assists for 66 points in 78 games. And since they lost a lot of their offensive firepower this summer, with guys like Joe Pavelski signing in Dallas, Donskoy going to the Avs, OhNyquist signing with the Blue Jackets, I thought Timo Meier was going to take on a lot more of a bigger role and really be relied upon to give this team a lot of their scoring and the majority of their offense, along with guys like Thomas Hertl and Kevin Labanc. But so far through the first 8 games, Timo Meier has kind of struggled a little bit with just 2 goals and 1 assist for 3 total points, but you have to take into consideration that the first 4 games of the year were awful for basically the entire San Jose team, and they kind of have turned things around a little bit since then. So I wouldn't be too worried about Timo Meier. If he gets going, I definitely still think he can score like 35 goals and be a 70-point guy because he's just too skilled to score at the rate he is so far throughout the whole season. Next up, from the Arizona Coyotes, I have Vinnie Hinojosa, and a lot of you might be thinking, well, he shouldn't really be doing that great, but last year he had a really good season, 16 goals and 23 assists for 39 points through 72 games, and so far this year, through the first 7 games, he still has yet to score a goal and has 2 assists for a total of 2 points. I could have chose Phil Kessel here, but I think Phil Kessel has definitely gotten going over the past couple of games, and this is an Arizona team that definitely still needs more depth scoring behind guys like Schmaltz, Keller, and Kessel, and I definitely thought heading into the year, Vinnie Hinojosa would be a guy who could build off of last season and really be a great, 15 to 20 goal scoring depth player for them, but so far through the first 7 games, he really hasn't been that. He's still been playing good, but just hasn't been able to find the back of the net just yet. Next up on the list, we have James Van Riemsdyk from the Philadelphia Flyers, a guy who you can usually count on to give you 20 goals in his sleep. Last year, he was solid, 66 games played, 27 goals, and 21 assists for 48 points. But so far, throughout the first 7 games of the season, he has been held off of the score sheet, 0 goals, 0 assists for 0 points. And when you take into consideration how good of a guy he is on the power play, he can even score pretty well at 5-on-5 and is most likely playing with some talented guys on this Philadelphia team, especially on the power play. It's kind of crazy that he hasn't even picked up a helper just yet. He definitely has been a little bit of a streaky goal scorer over the course of his career, so I think it should only be a matter of time before he really gets going and starts to find the back of the net. But so far, throughout the first 7 games of the season, I definitely think he's been a little bit disappointing. Moving along now to the Buffalo Sabres, I have defenseman Rasmus Ristolainen, probably about the only disappointing thing you can pick out from Buffalo's start to the season. Last year, Ristolainen had a really good offensive year with 43 points in 78 games, but the other side of his game in the defensive zone certainly wasn't the greatest. I know plus minus isn't, the most trustworthy stat to look at, and it doesn't really tell the whole story, but having the worst in the league is definitely not something you want to have on your resume. And this season so far, through the first 9 games, he has 0 goals and 3 assists for 3 points. And like I said, he's not some specimen of a shutdown defenseman. He's usually a guy you think of more as an offensive defenseman, but he hasn't really been putting up the greatest offensive numbers through the first 9 games of the season. Maybe it's because he doesn't want to play in Buffalo anymore. Maybe he is focusing more on his defensive game, but for his offensive standards, I definitely think it has been a little bit of a disappointing start to the year, but his plus minus is even, so that's definitely a bonus from his league worst last year. Moving along now to one of the new faces that New Jersey brought in this offseason, Wayne Simmonds. Usually a guy you can count on for like 15 to 25 goals, somewhere in that range, and to be a solid offensive player. And last year he was that with 30 points in 79 games split between the Flyers and the Predators. But so far this season, through the first 8 games, he has 0 goals and 1 assist for just 1 point. And when you consider he is taking up $5 million of the cap, I believe that is the 1-year contract that they gave him, that is definitely not offensive production that you need from him, because he's a guy you brought in to be a top 6 forward most likely, and to produce some offense and be a power play specialist for this team that desperately needs someone to really light a spark under them, because they kind of have gotten off to a pretty awful start to the year. Wayne Simmonds, still a good guy to have in the locker room, and definitely a great guy to have out there protecting some of your younger players, but even still, you don't want to give him that $5 million just to do that. He has to start putting up some goals and offensive numbers here soon. Moving along now, we have Nino Niederreiter from the Carolina Hurricanes, who as a team have gotten off to an amazing start to the season, but Nino Niederreiter definitely a slow start, especially considering how dominant he was offensively last year after the trade that sent him to Carolina. 36 games played, 14 goals, and 16 assists for 30 points, and so far this season through 9 games, he's yet to put the puck in the back of the net and has 3 assists for 3 total points. Him and Sebastian Aho both kind of gotten off to slow starts, but obviously it hasn't hurt this team at all, because you have guys like Eric Howla, Ryan Dzingel, and Andrei Svechnikov really carrying a lot of that offensive weight. But once Niederreiter and Aho get going offensively, it's just going to make this Carolina team that much better and that much more deadly of a team. And even though he hasn't gotten off to the greatest start, at least he's not playing like Victor Rask, who can't even stay in Minnesota's lineup. And remember, Carolina acquired Nino Niederreiter in a 1-for-1 deal for Rask. No matter what Niederreiter is doing this season, that deal is still an absolute steal for them. Moving along now to Joe Pavelski from the Dallas Stars, a guy they brought in this offseason to really take a lot of the offensive pressure off of that top line. And basically, I could have chose a lot of people from Dallas, not named Roope Hintz or Miro Heiskanen, because their whole team has kind of been underwhelming to start the year. But specifically, I went with Joe Pavelski just because he was so good last season with 38 goals and 26 assists for 64 points in 75 games. And so far, through the first 11 games of the season, he's kind of been struggling offensively, and yes, that is to be expected because it is a new team for him, but they have played the most games in the NHL. They've played 11, and this team just really looks awful, and if they don't get it together, they will not make the playoffs. But if Joe Pavelski could turn it on offensively and start scoring at a similar rate to what he did last season in San Jose, that would definitely go a long way in helping this team turn their year around. And now, finishing out the video with the player that I've been most disappointed with out of anybody anybody this season, and that is Florida Panthers goaltender Sergei Bobrovsky. Everyone, including myself, heading up to this season was talking about how much Florida needed goaltending, and then this summer they addressed that in a big way, signing one of the best goaltenders in the NHL for the past 10 years to a very, very lucrative deal, and I thought they would be a very dominant team this season, definitely in the regular season, and a threat to go deep in the playoffs. I mean, Steve Dangle even picked this team to win the Stanley Cup, but through his first 6 starts of the season, Sergei Bobrovsky has really looked below average and shaky at times. 2 wins, 2 losses, 2 overtime losses, a 4.07 goals against, and an 8.72 save percentage. Now, I know all this can't be, faulted on Sergei Bobrovsky. The defense definitely hasn't been that good either, but sometimes you need your goaltender to make a big save, and that is why they paid Bobrovsky so much money. He has to turn it around and play better if this Florida team wants to have any chance of doing damage in the Atlantic. So that is going to wrap up today's video. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Make sure to let me know down in the comment section who are some players that you've been disappointed with so far to start this season. And again, it is still very early, and hopefully all these guys can turn it around, and I'm sure most of them will. So with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you did enjoy, please make sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel for daily NHL content, and I will see you guys all in the next video.